There's been a lot of talk about how the Philippines just isn't as popular as it was 6 years ago. So, what I wanted to do was kind of a deep dive into the reasons. What is it that's causing this loss of interest in the Philippines in particular? Because travelers are still coming to Southeast Asia. They're coming to Malaysia, they're coming to Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. Now, I did a video a while back going over the numbers, how things have changed when it comes to foreign visitors going into the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Just comparing those four. And from 2019 up through 2025. And the way that it basically shook out is that Vietnam actually went up about 2 to 4%, roughly right about there. And then Thailand and Cambodia, they didn't move too much, but it was downward. And again, it was only about 2%. So for the most part, not big changes between 2019 and the end of 2025 for Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. But when it comes to the Philippines, they went from 2019 over 8 million foreign visitors, and by the end of 2025, they were just barely over 5 million, which is roughly about a 27-28% drop. The numbers are definitely indicating that people expats and travelers and vacationers are choosing either to not make a second return trip to the Philippines after their first trip, or they're just dodging it altogether and saying, well, I'll just go check out Vietnam. You know, they do their research online, they listen to vloggers from each country, and when the dust settles, more people are saying, yeah, I'll just fly to Vietnam, I'll just fly to Thailand, I'll just fly to Malaysia or Cambodia. That's the reality of the situation. So now let's take a look at some of the factors. What changed after 2019? Because a lot of the sort of negatives about the Philippines that I'll mention here, they were in existence back in 2019, and yet they were still getting over 8 million visitors. In fact, if anything, some of those things have been slightly improved over the last 5-6 years, and yet it has resulted in less visitors for the Philippines. Now, the first one that I'll bring up is, I think, very important because it is electricity, the availability of electricity. In this day and age, we're all connected to our smartphones, we have laptops, we have so many things, and then there's just the general convenience of having electricity so that you can cook and have a refrigerator and the lights on at night. And so electricity is one of those things that you really don't want to compromise on. Now, I checked it out, and essentially Thailand and Vietnam rated the highest in Southeast Asia, aside from Singapore, for consistent electricity, a solid electrical grid that has the fewest amounts of brownouts. That's kind of another thing. In the Philippines, they'll call it a brownout, even if the power is out for 4 hours. A brownout is when the electricity dims a little, but it stays on. That's a brownout. What the Philippines really has is blackouts. Zero power. There are no lights. If it's nighttime and you have a brownout, everything goes black. It does not go brown, it goes black. It gets dark. So when it comes to a stable electrical grid, Thailand and Vietnam come out on top among these four. Now, Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, they have a pretty reliable electrical grid. And with all four of these, it gets substandard when you're out in the rural areas. In the Philippines, they call the rural areas the province. But if you're in the rural areas of, say, Vietnam, Cambodia, or Thailand, yeah, you can expect maybe some brownouts. We'll just call them brownouts because everybody seems more comfortable with that term. But in the major cities, even in the Philippines, you will have rotating brownouts, and that is a really important metric that travelers and expats keep in mind when they're thinking about going on vacation, because they don't want to be in a situation where they have no internet, or the lights are not coming on, or the food is spoiling in the fridge because the power's out, or the most direct and instant negative is when the power goes out, there's no air conditioning. So you can see how that alone would affect a person's decision on where they would want to either vacation or retire to. So electricity is the first thing that has been a big negative for the Philippines for a long time. But again, it was like this in 2019, and they were getting over 8 million visitors. So we'll get into what I believe is my theory on why it's less here in a moment. Now, with electricity being a top concern, the next second item that comes up, whether it's in the Reddit groups or YouTube videos or travel websites, many expats are retired and they're, say older than 45, 50, even into their 60s and 70s. Healthcare is a huge concern, because even if you're young, you don't want to go cliff diving or doing some crazy stuff, and then you got a broken arm or you need some surgery. You want to have decent healthcare available. You want to know that you're in good hands. And even more so if you're older and you're in your 60s, 70s, and you have either existing health issues or you're just simply getting older and you're going to need more health care as you get older. You want to know that you're in a country that has some really top-notch medical services available. Now, in the Philippines, there is great health care if you're in Manila, which is very metropolitan, or if you're in Cebu. Many are familiar with Changhua Hospital. Or if you're in Davao. If you're in one of these major areas, you can have some very good healthcare available in the Philippines. However, if you're away from these areas and you're out at some island that is anywhere from 5 hours to 12 hours away from Cebu, Davao, or Manila, well, you may not survive to get to the hospital. And yes, there are hospitals, on the smaller islands, and there are even some good ones. In fact, on Bohol and Dumaguete and other cities, they have Ace Hospital, which is a franchise around the Philippines. And I've been in Ace Hospital twice for surgery, once for appendectomy and the other time for a hernia. I was very happy and satisfied with the level of care I got, the technology that was used, the surgeon was awesome. And so you can find, if you do your homework, and I suggest you do this if you're going to move to the Philippines, find out the island that you're interested in, do they have an ACE hospital? Again, I can highly recommend them. Because if there's no ACE hospital, and there's no Changhua hospital, and there's no major facility, again, like there is in Manila, Cebu, and Davao, if you're living way out in, say, Palawan, you're going to want to know that if you get hit by a car or you have some sort of medical issue, you want to know that if you're out on the outskirts somewhere, that you will have good medical care. And the reality is, the more rural you get, the less chance there is of having that available. So that's another big concern. But again, that's a static concern that has been around forever, and yet numbers were high back in 2019 and not so much now. Now, a third static concern that has been an issue for years is the issue of, let's just call it, traffic infrastructure and public transportation. In the Philippines, they do have, especially in the bigger cities, they do have a network of jeepneys, and they have Grab, and they have taxis, and they have bus systems. And I have seen a lot of improvement in this area in Cebu City, over the last 12 years. However, getting around on smaller islands can be a little trickier, especially when you're really not familiar with, say, the jeepney system. The jeepney system, it might be a certain route and it'll be called 013 or something like that. And it'll have painted on the side, goes from this place, that place. Well, you've pretty much got to go around taking pictures of these things and then getting on Google Maps and looking at the two locations. And, it's not that easy to work with. It takes a while living in the area to know the area and go, I want to get to Mandawi, or I want to get to Mambaling, or I want to get to Bantayan. You have to know the area. Now, contrast that with, say, Vietnam. Vietnam, you just download an app, and you can not only see the bus system on the map, you can stand at one of the pickup points, and you can see in real time where the bus is at. And okay, it's 5 blocks away, it's making its way towards you. That gives you a certain level of reassurance. It's also very inexpensive. You can get from one side of Saigon to the other very cheaply, like 50 cents or so. So when it comes to commuting around the Philippines, that's another concern that many people and many expats and vacationers have is, for instance, when they land from an international flight at the Manila airport, they come out in the international terminal. But if they have a connecting flight, say they go from United States to Manila, and then the second part of their flight is to go from Manila to, say, Dumaguete or Cebu, whatever. They're not going to be able to do that by just hanging out in the terminal and then go to their gate like you would in most other countries. You're going to have to go from the international terminal, get a taxi or wait for a shuttle, and hope your layover is long enough that you can get to the other building, the other terminal, which handles domestic flights. And I'm sure there's a high number of people who thought, 2-hour layover, that should be plenty of time. Well, yeah, good luck with that. It's almost like dealing with 4 little airports, 4 terminals, where you have to take a taxi, get over there. And that leads into, again, another transportation issue. Now, it's not particular to the Philippines. Same thing happens in Thailand. Same thing happens, well, actually, I never ran into this in Vietnam, is when you're in Manila or Cebu, but especially Manila, when you have to get to that terminal in the next 2 hours or 90 minutes, you've got to get there. And you're relying on hailing down a taxi. They know the score. And so instead of going by the meter, which is what they're supposed to do, I've lost count how many times a traveler has contacted me and told me, is it normal, $30 to get from one terminal to the other in Manila? No. That should have been like a $4 or $5 fare at the most. And so this predatory sort of exploitation of travelers when it comes to taxis, it's one of the things that travelers and expats just are sick and tired of dealing with. Same thing when you land, say, at the Cebu Pier 1. You come off the ferry, and then there's just this whole lineup of taxis there. And it's so bad over the years, I finally just gave up on them. I never take a taxi there. What I'll do is I just walk 2 blocks out to the Jollibee, and I hail a cab from there, or I use Grab. Because the ones that hang out at the, right there at the pier, either they refuse to use the meter, or they, and they'll tell you, well, I'll give you a special price. Well, the special price is usually double or triple what the normal fare on the meter would have been. Now, the law says with the LTO, they are required to use the meter. So whenever I tell them, this is years ago, because now I use Grab, like I said. But whenever I tell them, well, okay, I'm going here, but you're going to use the meter, right? Now, some of them will say they really don't want to use the meter, but they're required to by the LTO if they want to keep their taxi license. So they'll say, oh, yeah, we'll use the meter. Come on, climb on in. Well, once they've got your luggage in their trunk and you're sitting there and you're going down the road, then this is how predatory it can get. As you're going down the road, now that you're committed, he turns on the meter, but then he says, oh, it's so much traffic, I'm going to have to charge you extra 200 pesos. No, and I've told them, I said, no, this is why we use the meter. If there's traffic and it takes us longer to get there, the meter is going to pay you more because it takes us longer to get there because it goes both by the mile, but it also, or kilometer, but it also goes by time. So even if you're dead stuck in traffic, the meter is still running. And they know this, but they act like they don't. And then they say, well, I have to charge you extra because it's so late at night. And I told one taxi driver years ago, I said, you knew it was late at night when you showed up for work. Why are you surprised? And why does it cost more to drive at night? And another time I got a taxi and I wanted to go up to the hills beyond Lahug there in Cebu, to go to the Taoist temple and stuff like that. And so same thing. I said, well, yeah, you use the meter, right? He's like, oh, yeah. So we start going up the hill. He goes, I have to use more gas going up the hill. I need to charge you an extra, 100, 200 pesos, whatever. And I just said, so if I get you to take me back down the hill, since you're going to use less gas going downhill, are you going to give me a discount? And he just acted like he didn't understand. So this game playing, when it comes to transportation, especially with the taxis, that's another reason why many travelers, they come here and they go, well, I enjoyed the beaches. I had a great time at the resorts. I found some wonderful people that, were awesome to hang out with. But man, every time I need to get around, I'm like having to deal with these shysters. So you can avoid this, again, if you use the Grab app in the larger cities. There's also even it's actually called a Petty app, and you can call a tricycle. And then there's Maxim. You can ride on a motorcycle if you're not carrying a bunch of stuff. So these days there are more options, and yet, like I said, from 2019 to now, Philippines has dropped roughly 27, 28%. So now I want to get into my own personal belief to explain how is it that 6 years ago, Grab coverage wasn't as good. 6 years ago, they hadn't done whatever they could in the Philippines to improve the electrical system, the electrical grid. I mean, it's still not perfect. There's still outages on a regular, sometimes depending where you live, it could be every 2 weeks, twice a month. It could be every week, that you have an outage, whether it's for an hour or 4 hours. How is it that those things were still happening, and even worse, in 2019, but they had over 8 million visitors. And now that they've had 5-6 years to improve these things, the number of visitors has dropped so much. What explains that? Well, my theory is it all has to do with 2020 and the pandemic. Now, when the pandemic initially hit, it hit globally, as we all know. Didn't matter what country you were in, all of a sudden, not only was international or domestic travel very limited and controlled, but in addition to that, there were all these rules added. You had to wear a face mask, and you had to wear a breathing mask over your mouth, and you had to wipe your hands, and you couldn't have more than 2 people in a taxi unless they were married. I mean, there was all of a sudden all these restrictions, okay? And for instance, the Philippines eventually, just like many other countries, just closed off their border to any international incoming flights. You just could not get into the Philippines or Vietnam or Cambodia or most anywhere. Traveling internationally, you had to have COVID tests, and they had to be done within 24 hours, and so it was a nightmare, as we all know. So then that started in 2020. It progressed for a whole year, no improvement. Nobody was opening up their borders. And then roughly about the middle of 2022, after about 18 months of this nonsense, finally, countries started to open up. Now in Southeast Asia, one of the first ones I believe to open up was either Thailand or Vietnam, but they were both very close. Like within months or so, Thailand, all of a sudden Thailand and Vietnam, you didn't need a COVID test. You didn't have to do all this, mask and face mask thing. I mean, can you imagine being on a 15-hour flight from United States to Thailand or Philippines, whatever, and you got to wear a face mask and, the shield, the whole plastic face shield during your whole flight? It was just ridiculous. So what happened was about mid-2022, Thailand opened up their borders. Vietnam opened up their borders. Cambodia was like right after that. And so Philippines maintained closed borders. And so what happened was all these people that wanted to travel, they looked at these choices and they're like, I'd really like to go to the Philippines. I had no interest in Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia, but since they're open, I feel like getting out and traveling. So they booked the ticket. They went to Thailand, they went to Vietnam, they went to Cambodia, and they enjoyed it. And they were like, wow, the infrastructure is way better in these other countries, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. The electricity stays on. And they've got, 4G and 5G internet all over the place. And it's inexpensive. And the apartments are like 20% cheaper than what you get in the Philippines. And they're nicer. They're well maintained. And the food is healthier. So all these people that wanted to travel, that used to go to the Philippines, because the Philippine borders were still closed, Philippines was the last country in Southeast Asia to reopen their borders. So all these travelers that used to go to the Philippines, they went to Thailand, they loved it, and they just kept on going back. Or they became a permanent expat there. Same thing with Vietnam. Vietnam is, again, now very popular. A lot of the digital nomads are heading out to Da Nang, and that's having a sort of Dumageddon negative effect. But nonetheless, visitors are very interested in Vietnam these days. And I believe it's because they had that first mover advantage when it came to ending the whole pandemic limitations and reopening the borders. People went there, they loved it, and they just kept going back, and they never went back to the Philippines. Roughly 3 million of the Philippines expats and tourists tried out these other countries and decided they liked it better. So here we are now in 2026, and the Philippines Department of Tourism is going, okay, how do we fix this? They changed their slogan. It used to be more fun in the Philippines. Now I think they changed it about a year ago to love the Philippines, something like that. Well, a new slogan is not going to make people want to come back to the Philippines. What has to be addressed are the things that I mentioned here already. The infrastructure, the electricity, the choice in internet service providers, the cost of lodging, the transportation. There's, until these things are addressed in a very positive, proactive way, until potential visitors and expats see real improvement in these areas, they're going to continue to go where it's not only cheaper in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, but the medical care is more available, it's better, it's very high tech and modern, it's less expensive than the Philippines, electricity is less expensive, food is cheaper. So the free market has very clearly operated as expected. You've got countries that are offering a stable infrastructure, a good exchange on the dollar or the euro. They have good medical care available. And so naturally, that's where the people are going. So that's how I see it. This is why, to this day now, post-pandemic, people are not flocking back to the Philippines after their first visit because they come in, and yes, there's so many great things to enjoy about the Philippines. I've been here 13 years. I love it. You know, my wife and I, we plan on staying here the rest of our life. We love the beaches. We love the relaxed lifestyle. You know, there's so many good things that we love about the Philippines. But we also have rechargeable fans. We maintain our phone data plan because when the electricity goes out, the home network goes out, the air conditioning goes out, you know, so we're prepared. You know, we have solar panels to charge up our phones. I mean, you know, so for us, we've learned to compensate for the lack of electrical infrastructure. But a lot of people are not willing to do that, you know. And again, there's just so much to enjoy in the Philippines, but back to the free market. Until the Philippines can compete with the bang for your buck in Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, unless they can match that, people are going to continue to choose those countries rather than get overcharged for lodging, apartments, resorts, food, you name it, and not really getting the quality of service or goods that they can get elsewhere. There's a vlogger, his name is something like, I think it's called Nomad Capitalist, and he has a very catchy phrase for his channel. It's go where you are treated best. And that is the crux of this entire discussion. People will go where they are treated best. People will go where they get a quality experience for their dollar or euro. That's what they're going to do. So if we're going to see the numbers go up in the Philippines for new tourism and all that, and expats and long-term stayers, if that's going to happen, the experience on the infrastructure and addressing just, again, everything I've discussed has to happen. And if it doesn't, if it's just, you know, status quo for the next 3 years, well, then I really don't see where's the motivation for future expats and travelers to really choose the Philippines other than the one thing the Philippines has that Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia can't offer. And that is the fact that there's no language barrier. Any English-speaking American, Canadian, European can come to the Philippines and know, stepping right off the plane, no matter where they go, they can talk to everybody in English. But I know people will say, oh, they speak English downtown in Bangkok or wherever, you know, but really, on a day-to-day basis, you cannot just be walking down the street in Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia and stop a random person and say, hey, how do I get to the mall? Or where's the nearest supermarket? There's no English there. It's just, you know, good luck with that. Whereas in the Philippines, you can date, you can get around, you can ask questions, you can interact with the Filipinos here because they speak English. So I think that's what's keeping many coming back, you know, and then many have come here and married a Filipina and build a life here, and they don't mind. They're willing to buy homes, and they're willing to spend money at the resorts. They're willing to even help out with charities, and they're willing to provide money. These expats, they're willing to provide money for their in-laws, and they're willing to pay their hospital bills. I mean, there's a lot of good that expats do financially for the Philippines. And if the Philippines wants more of that, then they're just going to have to start stepping up their game on the infrastructure stuff so that they can compete with Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Because right now, travelers are showing with their dollars and euros, they would rather deal with a language barrier than rent a hotel and then there's no electricity, or move here permanently and the electricity goes out once a week for 4 hours, or constantly deal with, again, trying to move around the country with all of the logistics and unscrupulous taxis and whatnot. So love to hear your comments, your thoughts. I mentioned quite a few things here. What is your most important metric? What matters to you the most that causes you to choose any one of these 4 countries to either visit or live long term? So love to see you there in the comments, and we'll talk about something else later.